Alright, so I have finished penciling all of the pages for this mini comic that I'm working on, my mini comic about making comics. In today's tutorial, I'm going to show you how to do spot color illustration on these, and then in our tutorial following that, we're going to talk about inking. So the materials you're going to need for this tutorial are your penciled pages, and these were penciled with an accent color. So these were penciled with Pilot Color Eno Lead in their darker blue color. And this is going to remain on the page. This is an unusual twist from my normal inking procedures because we're going to leave the pencils on the page. We're not removing them. And we are also going to need, I happen to prefer Pentel brush pins. Oh, give me one sec, I'll be right back. I prefer Pentel brush pins for this. Unfortunately, mine have gone for a walk. So I am using one of these Sketchbox pins. You can also use alcohol markers. I'm using water-based and dye-based pins. So it's kind of a preference thing. You can even do this with watercolor, but this is the material I'm going to be using today. And our focus today is very, very narrow. We are just coloring all of one area with one color. I did have an example to show you guys, but unfortunately it has gone for a walk. So you're just going to have to learn by doing. So one of the first things I determined that we were gonna leave her hair, or her hair is going to end up being black, as will her eyebrows, but her eyes and her shirt are going to be this sort of non-photo blue. And we kind of start with that and then work our way out deciding what we want to spot color. Now, one of the reasons I like using dye-based watercolor markers for this sort of task is I can get kind of a consistent color, so it's less likely to streak as the water evaporates much more slowly than alcohol inks would. And that's one of the reasons we printed this out onto Canson watercolor paper, is it's going to be much more able to kind of hold on to this ink. And we're only going to do one color for this. We're not really going to do any shading. And we're applying this before we ink. Applying the color before I ink allows me to kind of leave some areas uninked, if that makes sense. So it's the order of operations that works best for me. And I'm not really liking this Sketchbox quote-unquote watercolor brush pen for this. Like I said, normally I would use the Pentel ones. They have really nice ink flow. This one wants to be a little bit stingy with the ink. Unfortunately, like I said, also mine went for a walk, so I'm on a time constraint. And while I did order another Pentel brush pen in this particular color, it's coming all the way from Japan. And at the time I ordered it, it said 2 to 3 day delivery. And somehow after I'd paid, it was like delivery date, December 18th. And I was like, yeah, that's gonna really be useful. And as you guys probably know, I am doing this for my Making Comics and Zines class. So this is a demonstration to help with those students. And spot color is a great way to kind of create impact, to add interest, and to have color, but it's very reasonable color. It's not as time consuming as, say, digital coloring, or as time consuming as using watercolor or using markers to color. Another thing I really like about using spot color is it just looks really good. It has like this neat sort of retro look, and it looks very stylish. And you're going to want to sort of use a buffer sheet of paper, especially if you're using dye-based markers. or water-based markers, because sweat, oils from your hands will reactivate these colors. And for me, this part of the process is a very quick process. And for me with these, my goal is for this to appear like a solid fill of color. That's not really being accomplished due to this marker, which again is why I'm going to recommend that you guys use a Pentel brush pen for this. Okay, so I have like my base colors filled in, right? So now I can decide whether I want to add more blue as an accent. And for an illustration for a comic page as simple as this, what we're really looking for is just a good balance. All right, I think that is one page. So some flaws I'd like to point out for you guys so you know what to look for. With this brush pen, the ink flow is stifled by a breathing tube inside, so you guys can actually see some gradation in the color application in general. That is something I would avoid in my own work. It's not something I enjoy. So it makes it, to me, look scratchy and less professional. And that's one of the reasons I generally like using the dye-based watercolor pens, is that I can get a really nice, even coverage. Sort of like in this example here. In this example, I use the red Pentel brush pen and I get really nice, even coverage, which is just not happening here. You guys, I think you can see the difference, because this looks more professional. This looks like a printer printed this all at one Pantone color, whereas this looks like it was filled in by hand. And often on this channel, you guys will hear me talk about how important the hand of the artist is, but it's not always desirable. And this is an instance where it was not desirable for me. So in the future, I will not be using these, and I'm just gonna have to redouble my efforts to find my Pentel brush pens. Generally, the next step would be to go ahead and start inking this, but I like to let these dry for 24 hours. So I'm just going to go ahead and move on to the next one. Like I said, this is a very quick process. I'm going to keep this handy off screen so I can reference it. And I'm just going to go ahead and get started with this one. You want to avoid allowing your ink to dry. So you want to avoid kind of long pauses in when you apply, because when you go back to it, that's more likely to cause streaking. So you want to try and fill the area all in one go if possible. So her hair is going to be mostly colored in black. So for the headphones to really pop out, I need to focus on maybe coloring them blue and white so that they stand out from her hair better. Now in this panel, I also want to focus on implying there is light. So the body of the scanner is probably going to be black. So I'm going to color the background around the scanner blue. And there are lots of different ways to use spot color. You can use it to imply form. You can use it to draw attention. You can use it to hint at shadow. I'm just demonstrating the methods that I'm using in this comic here. This is not intended to be like an all-around demonstration. Now, one of the neat things if you use alcohol inks or if you use water-based inks is that they have a tendency of kind of dissolving the lead. We've put down the colored lead. That's why you want to use a color that's going to suit what you're drawing, which is why we used dark blue. I'm just going to leave that kind of dry brush effect. I'm not necessarily going to try to completely fix it. I do like getting dry brush as part of when I do this. When I talk about getting a flat, even fill, a little bit of dry brush, a little bit of texture is good. It's the variation in tones that I find a little frustrating. Now, the exciting thing about traditional media, especially with this, is if you make a mistake, you often just have to live with it. So for these files that I'm coloring right now, I should have left them white and I should have colored the background in blue. But I was thinking of them not as comic scans, but as Photoshop files. So, you know, I did not make the best choice, but I need to commit to it because I've already started. And having to commit to things, knowing you can't always fix them, it definitely inspires a lot of creativity because you have to solve the problem. And for people like me, that can be really exciting. And I really enjoy problem solving, especially when it comes to art. And it's one of the things I don't necessarily care for when it comes to digital art is because you can undo things, you have to kind of set your own limitations of like, well, how many times will I allow myself to redo this? So doing traditional art has definitely made me a more decisive artist. I mean, you know, you have to like, when you work in traditional art, perfectionism is kind of the enemy of what we're doing because you might spend the rest of your life redoing the same piece trying to get it just right. Whereas I think working traditionally and having to but having to stand by your decisions is more just like living as a human, because as humans we make mistakes and we can't always fix them. And sometimes part of the process is learning to accept that we make mistakes and that we can't fix them. And why shouldn't, to some degree, art really reflect life, the eternal struggle? Why should it be so different? And that's not me slamming on digital artists. I do also work digitally quite frequently. That's just, you know, sometimes it's nice to live and die by what you're doing. To make decisions that, you know, you have to either, oh, see, messed up there too. This brush pen is really frustrating to use. The ink flow is terrible. They're trying to be like a mermaid marker clone, and they're just not. I wouldn't have used mermaid markers for this. Anyway, I know y'all don't want to hear me complain about my supplies. I'm actually going to go over this again. It makes it a little darker, which is kind of unfortunate because we start losing some of that color consistency. You can also use your spot color to push something entirely into the background, like I'm doing with the back leg here, since that would be in shadow. Although I'm going to end up coloring that black. Anyway, but you guys get my point. Alright, so that is another page done. I'll do one more for it, you guys, and then I'll check in with you guys after they've all been completed before we start our next stage. Oh man. So when filling in large areas like this, I'm gonna have to go over it again. I can't get the ink flow on this thing to, like, you guys are watching how dry this is. Anyway, you really don't want it to look as patchy and scratchy as this, so I'm gonna go over it again. But as you guys can see, the file we're dragging is the same color as the background, or will be. And I'm going to do a few things in the inking stage to help better differentiate that. but I'm going to go over this background again because it's really, really scratchy. If I was going for kind of a watercolor look, it wouldn't bother me so much, but that's not really what I'm going for at all. I'm going for like a retro flat fill kind of look. And different papers behave differently too. Now, normally I use Fabriano Studio. When I'm doing this sort of work, it's a watercolor paper with nice tooth that's abysmal to paint on, but it takes like inking and spot color really well, and I'd run out of it. And since I'm doing this for my class, I needed things done in a certain amount of time, so I grabbed my standby, which is Canson Montball, which I use for Cara pages, and I think it's like I think this is a two-part problem. All right, art nerds, so I have all 5 of these pages spot colored. The next step is to start inking the figures themselves, and I'm going to do that in the next video. So thank you guys so much for joining me. I hope this video was helpful, useful, and inspiring for you guys. If you have any questions or if you need anything explained further, feel free to ask me in the comments below. And I hope you check out some of my other videos in my Making Comics and Zines series. If you're looking for more comic tutorials, make sure you check out my Intro to Comic Craft. That is a series that spans both this YouTube channel and my blog, and there's loads of great resources in that series. So thank you guys so much for watching. Hopefully I'll see you guys again really soon with our inking video, and I hope you guys have a great day. Bye guys!